What happens when seeking enlightenment becomes an obsession? Zen is often imagined as serene, silent gardens, still minds, and soft dawn bells. But behind that calm lies a world of brutal discipline. Centuries-old Zen monasteries demanded total obedience, rising before the sun, meditating for endless hours without moving, working in silence until every trace of the self was scraped away. Sleep was rationed. Food was barely enough to survive. A single lapse of focus could bring a strike from the master's staff. The purpose was not peace. It was annihilation. To crush the ego, to dissolve desire, to burn away every illusion until nothing remained but pure awareness. Most monks endured this training for years and never reached enlightenment. Some broke. A few disappeared. And one went further than anyone had ever dared. This is the true story of a Zen monk named Sōen, who tried to erase everything human in order to become something more, something divine, and lost his mind on the way. He was born on the outskirts of Kyoto in the fading autumn of 1689, when the air itself smelled of damp persimmon leaves and forgotten prayers. The world was still licking its wounds from civil war, yet in that quiet village, time seemed reluctant to move at all. The boy was called Sōen. He came into the world silently, as though already listening. His mother died of fever before his third winter, leaving behind only a comb carved from ivory and a lullaby no one else knew. His father, hollowed by grief, or perhaps by something older, walked into the mountains and never returned. The villagers found the boy wandering among the persimmon trees, barefoot, thin, and unblinking. He did not cry. He did not speak. When they knelt to comfort him, he simply stared at their lips, moving, as if human words were birds flying too quickly for him to follow. One elderly woman wrapped him in a rice sack and carried him to the local Tendai temple. The head priest, a stooped man whose eyebrows drooped like gray moss, studied the boy for a long while. "He has the eyes of someone who is listening to something we cannot hear," he said. And when they asked what should be done, the priest replied, "Let him sweep." And so swept. At first he did it awkwardly, dragging the bamboo broom through the temple courtyard gravel, scattering it into erratic patterns. But each day, before dawn, he rose and swept again. His small arms learned the rhythm of the gravel's whisper. By the time he was 7, he could clear the entire courtyard before the first bell rang. He still barely spoke, yet when he swept, his eyes grew calm, almost luminous, as though the broom were drawing the shape of silence itself. The other boys in the village laughed at him. They ran shouting through the rice paddies, chasing dragonflies, while Sōen stayed behind, raking gravel, stacking stones, tracing circles until his fingertips bled. Once, when they taunted him, he simply blinked and continued working, his lips pressed tight, his back straight as a temple pillar. The old priest watched from the veranda and thought, "This boy will either burn like a star or vanish like mist." At 10, he could sit unmoving for hours, not slouching, not fidgeting, sitting as a stone sits, with the gravity of centuries. The villagers found this unnerving. They whispered he was touched by spirits. One night, during the Oban festival, when the lanterns floated on the river like souls returning home, they saw him kneeling alone at the water's edge, staring at the flames until the winds snuffed them out. He did not flinch. He only whispered, "Gone," and returned to the temple. By 12, the old priest decided the boy had outgrown their small temple. He took Sōen by the hand and led him to the foothills, where the Rinzai monastery of Myokakuji rose like a stone crown against the gray sky. It was a place of severe beauty, cedar forests wrapped in mist, moss climbing the ancient steps, wind screaming through wooden corridors. Silence lived there like an animal. The priests there bowed so slowly it seemed they were falling through water. The old Tendai priest bowed low before the abbot and said, "This boy has fire in him, but fire must learn its own shape." The abbot, a tall man with a face like weathered oak, gazed at Sōen for a long time. The boy gazed back, unblinking. Finally the abbot nodded. "Let him enter." That winter, Sōen's new life began. They woke at 3 bells before dawn. The mountain air was a knife, slicing through robes stiff with frost. Sōen, smaller than the others, followed them across the stone courtyard, each step sinking into snow. The meditation hall was unheated, the tatami stiff with cold. The moment they sat, the bell rang once, a single iron note that seemed to pierce the skull, and silence collapsed over them like a falling mountain. They sat for hours. At first, pain came like fire. His knees throbbed, his back shrieked. But Sōen did not move. He watched the pain like a lizard watches a fly. Soon the pain dissolved into numbness. Numbness dissolved into soundless space. By the end of the week, he could sit longer than novices twice his age. He spoke rarely. When spoken to, he bowed and gave short, soft answers. The older boys called him the stone ghost, yet there was something in him that frightened even the senior monks, an intensity too still, too sharp. When hunger gnawed at his belly, he did not move. When the snow bit his skin raw, he did not move. One monk whispered that he had seen Sōen's breath slow until it vanished, as if he were not alive at all but something else, mimicking a boy. One moonless night, long after curfew, a senior monk found him kneeling outside the hall. His lips were blue, his hands raw with cold. On the stone in front of him, frost had formed a perfect circle. He had been exhaling onto it again and again, watching it vanish, then return, then vanish. "Mind, are you here?" the monk asked. "To see what is left when the breath stops," Sōen said. It was the first full sentence he had spoken in months. From then the masters watched him closely. They admired his discipline. They feared it too. He did not laugh. He did not rest. He ate less than anyone, barely enough to keep his body upright. His ribs grew sharp as brushstrokes under his skin, yet his eyes were steady, dark pools reflecting nothing. He copied sutras until his fingers cramped into claws. His calligraphy was flawless, almost frightening. Each character stood as if carved from black stone. The head scribe whispered, "His brush is not writing. It is cutting the paper." He never showed the ink on his fingers, nor the blisters. He simply bowed and copied more. At night, he sat alone in the garden, even when the snow climbed to his waist. Cicada screamed through summer, maples bled red in autumn, and winter returned like a blade. But still he sat. While the others spoke of enlightenment as a distant star, Sōen spoke of nothing at all. Yet something vast and hungry had begun to stir behind his silence. There were moments, tiny cracks, when the masks slipped. Once, while sweeping, he paused and stared at the broom bristles trembling in the wind, his lips parted as though he had seen something unbearably beautiful or unbearably cruel. Another time, during chanting practice, his voice rose for the first time, sharp as broken glass, before vanishing back into silence. The other novices stared at him as though he had shouted in a graveyard. When he turned 14, the abbot called him to the inner garden. There was a frozen pond there, its surface cracked like an old mirror. The abbot said, "You have no fear of stillness, this is good. But stillness can become a mirror that shows only yourself. Do you understand?" Salman bowed, "Yes, master." But he did not understand. Or perhaps he did, and decided it did not matter. That night he sat until dawn, staring at the cracked pond, waiting for it to tell him what lay beyond reflection. This was how it began. A boy who listened too hard, and silence that listened back, and something ancient, coiled deep in the dark of his mind, beginning to wake. The monastery woke before the snow could remember its own name. 3 bells, bare feet to the stone, the slow drift of robes like black water through the corridors. Soon moved among them as if pulled by an invisible thread, each motion exact, economical, increasingly severe. The others were learning discipline. Sōen was learning something more dangerous, momentum. In the second winter, the abbot assigned him a teacher, an austere master named Ryuboku, whose eyebrows arched like falcon wings. Ryuboku spoke little and looked less impressed. He gave Sōen his first koan, a single word, brought from China like a flint struck against the skull. Mu, carry mu, he said, not in your mouth, in your marrow. Sōen bowed and left the room as if carrying a hot coal. He did as he was told. He carried Mu across the courtyard, into the meditation hall, down into the well of his breath. He carried it as he ate, chewing rice that felt like paper. He carried it to the latrine. He carried it into sleep until sleep became unusable. Just a white cloth thrown over a furnace. When he walked inside Mu. When he spoke, which was rarely, every word felt like betrayal, because it was not Mu. Ryuboku observed quietly as Sōen's body thinned and his eyes sharpened like whetted blades. During interviews, the master would strike the floor with his stick and bark, "Show me Mu." Sōen's throat seized with the urgency of it. He wanted to hurl his very being at the master like a spear. The session weeks, the intensive retreats, were their own season of weather, 7 days of sitting that scraped the mind down to bone. Who was Sōen during those weeks? A bell and a heartbeat, knees like burning knots, back like a post driven into frozen earth. The hall filled and emptied of sunlight, of breath, of the faint smell of old straw. In the 6th hour, thoughts swarmed. In the 10th, they broke apart like ice. In the 20th, there was only Mu. Coarse and total, a taste you could not spit out. He began to sleep sitting up, hands in the cosmic mudra, chin dropped to the sternum. He shaved all food down to necessity, a handful of barley, a sip of soup. He tied his sleeves so they would not flap and distract him. He learned to hold still while the body screamed, and, after a time, to stop hearing the scream. The others admired him and kept their distance. His devotion had no warmth in it, it was a wind that scoured. If he smiled, and he did not, his mouth would have cracked. One night, midway through a snow-heavy session, he felt his mind tug loose from its moorings. Mu swelled until it was the size of the sky, the size of silence itself. Then the world began to behave as if someone had lifted it and tilted it slightly. The candle's flame bent toward him. The grain of the tatami came forward until it was the only thing, all roads and rivers leading toward that weave. He tried to breathe and could not remember where breath was stored. He told no one. He feared to ruin it by naming it. As morning Dokusan, he knelt before Ryuboku in the cramped interview room. The master's breath smelled faintly of tea and wintergreen. "Show me Mu," the master said, voice easy and lethal. Sōen bowed so low his forehead touched the floorboards. Then, without thinking, he snapped his spine upright and barked like a fox. The sound leapt from his throat, raw, unpremeditated, an animal thrown. Silence afterward was not absence, but saturation. Ryuboku's eyes brightened, a dangerous brightness that held both approval and warning. "Keep going," he said. Sōen left the room, dizzy, elated, ashamed he could not tell which was which. All day he wiped tables and hauled buckets, and heard the bark still echoing under his ribs like thunder trapped in a valley. He redoubled everything. When the bell rang for meals, he arrived early to sit in the corner and gnaw at moves at a root. On work details, he moved like an arrow, shot from a bow, never missing the target of the next breath. When fatigue collapsed others into furtive naps, Sōen snapped his eyes open as if waking were the only honorable posture. He began to cut sleep down to 2 hours, then 1. He learned to kneel the extra hour after lights out, the room a reservoir of darkness that seemed to deepen as his mind thinned. The first small error came with a broom. He swept the cloister walk, drawing long, clean corridors through the dust. A novice came by, grinning, and scuffed footprints into the fresh path. Sōen felt a blade rise in him, ridiculous, disproportionate. The novice laughed again. The laugh had the brittle ring of youth that has not yet met consequence. Sōen looked at him until the boy looked away. Then Sōen swept the prince with a ruthlessness the novice felt without knowing why. Nothing happened. Yet, something had already happened. A week later, Ryuboku took him to the back garden, a short rectangle of earth where winter vegetables crouched under straw. They stood without speaking. Their breath made small white flags in the cold. "Your Mu is bright," the master said at last, "but your seeing is narrow." He tapped the ground with his stick. "Snow does not try to be white." Sōen bowed, the standard refuge of a mind that could not yet answer. Later that night he thought he understood. He tried to stop trying. He strained to abandon striving. He took up non-striving with the same rigidity as striving and called it humility. He did not see the trap yet. Traps, after all, are built from what you cannot see. In the third spring, the monastery's cherry trees exploded into a soft riot. Petals fell into the stone basins like clouds dissolving into water. Tourists from the village came to the lower gate to gaze up and murmur. Sōen noticed none of it. He had begun to seal his senses, not only as a discipline but as a habit, like a door quietly locked out of reflex. He ate less. He cut rice with barley with hot water with breath. He pushed through hunger into a high, glassy alertness. Colors grew harder at the edges. In the meditation hall, dust motes drifted like fleets under command. His thoughts, once a murmuring crowd, had thinned into hard, bright birds that wheeled and cut and vanished into an empty sky. A senior monk, concerned, pressed a small sweet into his palm after evening service. "You are not a ghost," the monk said gently. "Don't become one." Sōen bowed, pocketed the sweet, and later threw it into the garden for the sparrows. It felt like defeat to accept it. During Dokusan, Ruboku stopped asking for Mu and started asking for Sōen. "What is this?" he would say, rapping the floor. "Floor," Sōen would answer at first, surprised by how dumb and disobedient the mouth felt, with non-koan words in it. "Too late," Ruboku said, "before the floor." Sōen closed his eyes and threw himself against the wall of the question until his shoulders ached. He left those interviews shaking, not with fear, but with the voltage of impact, a boxer's tremor after a long round. The first vision came on a wet afternoon when rain stitched the eaves to the ground. He had been sitting since before dawn, in the corner where the floor dipped slightly and made a pool of coolness. He had fasted for 2 days, which felt less like a choice than a contour the day had fallen into. His breath was thin as rice paper. Mu was everywhere and nowhere. Then, between one breath and the next, the hall opened. That is the best word for it. Walls remained, pillars stood where they must, the bell rope dangled, but everything was through. He saw the monk before him, and the space where the monk was not, and the space pressed forward and back and inside so that the monk was a mouth of space, speaking space. His own body untied itself. Grief from his childhood rose like steam and evaporated under a wind that came from no direction. He felt an urge to laugh so clean it was almost pain. A tear fell onto the tatami, he did not know whose. The vision passed as quietly as a hand lifting from water. He tried to catch it and could not. He tried to stop trying and could not. He sat until night, and then through night into a pale, merciful dawn, the kind that makes even planks look holy. At Dokusan he said nothing about it. When Ryuboku barked, "Show me!" Sōen's hand snapped up and struck the tatami with a sound like a hand striking a drum at the bottom of the sea. The master held his gaze for a long time, then nodded once. "Keep going," he said again, the same words but weighted differently now, the way take care can be blessing or warning, depending on the road. Sōen left vibrating like a struck bell. The vibration lingered. He believed, no, he knew. The gate had cracked. Salvation seemed measurable now, like distance to a mountain pass. He began to calculate without noticing that he was calculating. He turned calculation into piety. He charted the hours in pencil on the thin paper of his sutra copies. Sits, breaths, tasks, interviews. He cut speech further, reduced the use of his eyes, tightened the rope of discipline until his thoughts had to pass single file. He became allergic to deviation. When a novice entered the hall late and bowed twice instead of 3 times, a spear of irritation rose in Sōen's chest before dissolving. A quick, shameful flare he pretended not to notice. He noticed. He judged himself for noticing. He judged himself for judging. He added the judging to his burden and called it sincerity. On a wind-scoured night, he walked the outer path alone. the cedars hemming him in like a black crowd. Breath plumed before him, fox prints stitched cryptic messages across the snow. He stopped and looked up at the cold crown of stars. "What is left when the breath stops?" he asked again. Remembering the boy with blue lips and the frost circle years ago, he felt the answer not as words, but as pressure under the sternum, a door swelling against its frame. He pushed harder. He lengthened sits even on non-session days until joints groaned. He fasted past dizziness into a mild, floating competence. He cleaned the kitchen with a zeal that made the other monks carefully grateful. He refused extra blankets in the dormitory, citing thrift. In truth, he wanted the cold to press him clear. The second vision was rougher, almost ungentle. It came during kinin, the slow walking meditation where each breath articulates a footstep. He felt a hand at the back of his skull. No hand. A force. And the line of monks ahead doubled and then stripped down so he could see the skeleton of each step, the arithmetic of bodies and air. His mouth flooded with the taste of metal. He fought panic the way you fight waking from a dream you wish to keep. When it was over, the world felt too small. He wondered if he was breaking. Then he wondered if breaking was progress. Ruiboku called him to the garden again. The master set a kettle on a brazier and poured tea in silence. He passed a cup to Sōen, who cupped it as if it were an animal that might leap. "Stop refusing gifts," the master said. Sōen flushed. He did not know how Ruiboku had seen the candy thrown to the sparrows. He said nothing. "Your effort is like a blade," Ruiboku continued. "Blades cut clean, or they cut everything. When the hand is tired, it mistakes flesh for rope." Sōen bowed, and, in the bow, felt a tremor of anger. At himself, at the lesson, at the cup he was afraid to enjoy. He drank the tea. It was smoky, ordinary, devastating. After that, he tried, sporadically, gracelessly, to soften. He helped a coughing elder with his bedding. He lingered a heartbeat longer over the smell of steamed rice. He did not call this mercy. He called it calibration, because mercy sounded like a luxury for men who slept more than 2 hours. The body began to send invoices. His gums bled when he brushed. His joints felt packed with sand. Strange headaches moved like a pale animal under the skin of his scalp. When he spoke, if he had to speak, words emerged with the weight of stones hauled from a well. He caught shadows at the edge of his sight, scurrying, then vanishing. Sometimes he woke standing beside his mat, having risen and bowed in the darkness to something that was not there. He kept going. On a damp summer evening, he took the night watch, pacing the perimeter while frogs stitched their chorus through the puddles. He smelled rain and the haunted sweetness of wet cedar. Near the north gate, he heard someone sobbing. He turned and found no one. He realized after a moment that the sound came from his own mouth, open without permission, pouring a grief he did not recognize. He stood until the sobbing emptied itself out like a basin tipped. Then he returned to the hall and sat until morning. At Dokusan, Ruiboku asked him abruptly, "Why practice?" Sōen opened his mouth. The true answer leapt forward, to end pain. And he strangled it because it was an answer a child would give. He said the polished things. To realize true nature, to serve all beings, to repay the kindness of the Buddhas. Ruiboku nodded at each and looked past them as one looks past birds. "Bring me the one that burns your tongue," Ruiboku said softly. Sōen bowed so slowly it hurt and left. That night he did not sleep at all. He sat and held the burning in his mouth until it became a shape he could not spit out or swallow. When dawn slid between the slats, he rose with a steadiness that felt like despair's older brother. He washed his face in the stone basin, cold water shocking the eyes clear. He looked up and saw reflected in the trembling surface not his face, but a mask that had learned his face so well no one could tell the difference. The thought arrived with the simplicity of a knife. If the mask awakens, does the one behind it need to? He did not tell anyone he had thought that. He did not tell anyone that the thought thrilled and terrified him, that it suggested a bypass, a way to leap clean over the painful, human parts of the path: hunger, tenderness, dumb fatigue, and enter a realm where only purity could breathe. He did not tell anyone that when he bowed to the Buddha statue that morning, he did not feel reverence so much as kinship with stone. The day rolled forward: bells, rice, chores, moo. The wind rose and smacked the paper screens like an impatient ghost. He moved through it all with a competence that might have been called grace if it had not been so brittle. Night came early, as it does when the mind is tired. He listened to the dormitory breathe. He opened his eyes into darkness, and finally admitted, only to the wood and the moths, that he wanted to be done with being a person, not out of hatred for people, but from wanting to join the blank, clean weather that seemed to spill from the visions. He wanted to be a mouth for what he had almost seen. He wanted to be more than a monk. He wanted to be the thing the monk points to. In the thin hour before dawn, he knelt again on the tatami, spine like a string pulled taut to an unseen peg. And somewhere in the slow machine of his body, a ratcheting sound clicked forward one notch, almost imperceptible, impossible to undo. He would later remember the click as a beginning. For now he rose at the bell, smoothed his robe, and stepped into the corridor. His feet were light, his face was calm. He joined the line of monks moving toward the hall. And no one who looked at him could have guessed that he had chosen something without words for it yet. A vow, made not to a master or a statue or the sutras, but to an empty, burning center. The fire inside, which had been fuel, started to believe it was light. The body, he decided, was only a door. Doors exist to be passed through. Sōen began the 3rd year at the monastery with this quiet conviction lodged like a blade behind his ribs. The visions had shown him glimpses, a seam opening, the skin of the world trembling. He believed now that the only obstacle was himself, the body's softness, the mind's laziness, the lingering stickiness of being human. If he could burn these away, what remained would be pure, indestructible, awake. So he began to burn. The hunger discipline. He dismantled eating first. Not fully, he was too clever for that, but systematically. He thinned rice with water, then water with air. He chewed each mouthful until it was nothing, until even taste became suspect. He began skipping the evening meal under the pretense of extra meditation. At first, the hunger came like a storm, howling, insistent. Then it grew refined like cold metal, almost clean. His thoughts sharpened to bright, thin lines. He felt taller. He felt hollow, in the way a bell is hollow, ready to resonate. The older monks noticed. One left half an orange on his mat. Sōen stared at it until it browned, then buried it under cedar needles behind the zendo. The abbot said nothing, though his gaze lingered on the boy's collarbone, sharp as a crow's wing beneath the robe. By midsummer his stomach had gone quiet. Food became not nourishment but ceremony, like placing flowers on an empty altar. He lost the roundness of youth, his skin pulled tight over bone, his shadow lengthened. When he knelt, he looked carved rather than born. But discipline is hungry too. It consumes what feeds it. Hunger was only the first course. The sleep wore. Next he dismantled sleep. At first he merely shortened it, 4 hours, then 3, then 2. He trained himself to wake the instant the temple bell trembled. He tied his sleeves to keep his arms from collapsing as he sat. When drowsiness came, he forced his eyes open until they watered. He practiced walking meditation around the courtyard in the black hours before dawn. Steps slow and measured, each breath soldered to a footfall. Soon the body rebelled, his thoughts blurred, his fingers fumbled suture brushes. He walked into door frames. His skull throbbed with a deep pulsing ache like a drum buried under the floor. Once, while drawing water from the well, he forgot the bucket halfway up and stood holding the rope until his palms bled. Still, he persisted. When the eyes sagged, he whispered koans into the dark to keep them from closing. Moo, 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 until the syllable burned away language. If he must rest, he He sat upright, chin on his chest, counting breaths like beads slipping from a broken string. Weeks passed. The exhaustion became its own climate. He moved through it as a swimmer moves through water, slow and silent, limbs trailing. He began to see flickers, figures darting at the edge of sight, shadows that dissolved if he turned. Once, during Kinhin, he saw the floor undulate gently like the skin of a sleeping animal. He blinked. The floor was still. He said nothing. The others had started to avoid him. He radiated a stillness too taut, like the silence in a room where something has just broken. His face no longer expressed the small fluxes of human mood. Even when addressed directly, his gaze passed through people like wind through rice stalks. He did not notice this happening. He was too busy trying to erase the idea of noticing. The flesh's obstacle. As food and sleep receded, the body itself became offensive, too slow, too warm, too impermanent. He sought ways to discipline it into transparency. He took cold baths before dawn, submerging in the mountain-fed cistern until the cold scoured thought away. He stood barefoot in the courtyard snow and recited sutras until his voice trembled out of rhythm. When he swept, he chose the heaviest broom, hauling it until the muscles in his shoulders screamed. He wore the thinnest robe aloud, refusing extra layers, even in the blue, knifing wind. He interpreted pain as proof. Discomfort meant progress. If it hurt, it was working. One afternoon, while carrying firewood, he stumbled and gashed his palm on a split log. Blood welled, startlingly red. He wrapped the hand in his sleeve and kept stacking until he finished the task. That night, fever tickled his spine. He sat through it, sweat pooling at his knees, lips bloodless. By dawn, the fever had receded, leaving behind a thin exhilaration, a conviction that he had passed some invisible test. He began inventing tests. He knelt on raw wood instead of tatami. He fasted 3 days, then 5. He practiced breath-holding until black motes burst behind his eyes. He walked the cliff path at night without a lamp, daring the void to take him. He stopped blinking during meditation until tears streamed and dried on his cheeks like thin salt. The body bent under him like a bowstring, trembled. The mind splinters. At first the mind applauded these cruelties. It whispered, closer. Then it began to crack. During chanting, words slipped sideways, syllables melting into meaningless sound. He caught himself muttering responses before questions were asked. He lost track of days, their boundaries dissolving into one continuous gray breath. Once he found himself standing in the bell tower, with no memory of climbing it, watching the monastery roofs below tilt like paper boats. He started hearing a voice, not external, a seam in his own thought speaking out of turn. It said little, only, stop. He ignored it. Then, enough. He clenched his jaw until it hurt. Then, quieter. You are killing what you need. This frightened him, briefly. Then he decided fear was another barrier. He sat longer, he starved harder, he told no one. The master intervenes. Ruboku summoned him to the rock garden where raked gravel lay in combed ripples like the memory of waves. The master stood motionless as stone. Sōen bowed until his spine creaked. You are thinner than your shadow, Riboku said at last. Sōen said nothing. Your stillness is good, said the master, but it has turned inward. It is staring at itself. When a snake bites its tail long enough, it becomes only hunger. Huntsman's mouth filled with the taste of iron. I seek to pass through, he said. Ryoboku's gaze sharpened. There is no through. Silence. Wind teased the gravel, scattering delicate patterns. Finally, Ryoboku said, when you walk, walk as if there is nowhere to arrive. When you sit, sit as if there is nothing to achieve. I understand, Sōen said. You do not, said Ruboku, and left him there among the raked waves. That night, Sōen dreamed he was walking across an endless courtyard, sweeping. No matter how much he swept, dust kept falling from the sky, soft and gray as ash. When he woke, his hands were curled into claws. unraveling. Summer came, heavy and wet. Cicadas screamed until the air trembled. Sweat glued his robe to his skin. He kept pushing. Every sit was a battlefield. The body rebelled in whispers, blurred vision, ringing ears, gums bleeding, limbs quivering at rest. Once, kneeling, his legs went dead and did not return. 2 monks had to carry him to his mat like a bundle of firewood. He lay all night staring at the beams, hearing them whisper in languages he did not know. The visions returned, sharper, crueler. Lines of light traced the edges of things. His air seemed to bend around his thoughts. Voices muttered in the wooden grain, too fast to catch. He felt hollowed, scraped clean, but not clean enough. Never enough. The threshold. On the 99th hour of a session, after 3 days without sleep, he reached a place where the body simply stopped reporting. There was only a ringing, high and cold, like the world held its breath. The hall dissolved into white. His hands were gone, his knees were gone, he was gone. There was only listening. It lasted a moment or a century. Then the body slammed back into him like a bell struck too hard. He woke sprawled on the tatami, lips split, limbs shaking as if they belonged to someone else. The other monks were staring. One whispered his name. Another crossed himself like a peasant warding off spirits. Sōen pushed himself upright, bowed once, and left without speaking. Outside, the night was blistered with stars. He walked the courtyard until dawn, hands trembling, eyes wide and dry. And somewhere inside, past the throb of pulse and pain, something exulted. He had touched the edge, and he could not stop now. The body had been broken down, or at least beaten into silence. What remained now was the mind. And the mind, Sōen was beginning to discover, was far less obedient. The hollowing. In the weeks after the collapse on the tatami, something inside him seemed to loosen. Not relief, not release, more like a knot slipping silently without permission. He moved through the monastery as if walking under water, the world's edges blurred. Sound seemed to arrive from a great distance, even when someone was speaking inches from him. He sat longer than ever. 12 hours, 14, he forgot to count. The bell would ring for meals or work duty, and only when someone touched his shoulder would he notice the day had passed. When he stood, the ground rocked. Sometimes he forgot which body in the room was his, until he looked down and saw the robes on his own lap. At night he lay staring at the rafters, watching them breathe. He thought, perhaps this is emptiness. Sadness, perhaps. This is madness. Then perhaps there is no difference. Fractures. The hallucinations began quietly. At first they were only small distortions. The tatami grain bending into spirals, candlelight freezing mid-flicker, the sensation of someone stepping just behind him, though the corridor was empty. He told himself it was exhaustion, the friction of practice burning through sleep and food. But they multiplied. During Kinhin, the slow walking meditation, he would see monks ahead of him dissolve into black mist and reform. In chanting, the syllables would unweave, scattering like startled birds. One afternoon, sweeping the garden, he saw the stone lanterns bow to him as he passed. He bowed back, without thinking. The others began whispering, not to him, around him. Their eyes slid away like minnows. Even Ruboku's gaze carried a flicker of concern, quickly extinguished. Sōen did not care. The hallucinations felt less like errors and more like hints, fragments of a deeper layer showing through the paint. The world was cracking, and he was the only one who noticed. The vanishing of self. Koan interviews became unbearable. Riboku would strike the floor and bark, "Show me," and Sōen would open his mouth but no voice came. Words felt fake, meat-like, heavy. Once he simply stared until Riboku dismissed him with a shake of the head. He stopped speaking entirely for several weeks. Silence settled over him like a robe of ash. And beneath that silence, something stranger grew, a sense that Sōen was not real. The name, the body, the memories of persimmon trees and childhood, these were just shadows on a wall, puppets cast by something he could almost see, if he sat still enough. Sometimes he felt he was watching himself from above, a marionette pulled through chores and bows. The detachment was terrifying for a moment, then exquisite. It came with a weightless peace, like standing on the edge of a cliff and realizing gravity had forgotten you. He began to crave that forgetting. The mirror cracks. Late one night during Zazen, his mind slipped its leash entirely. He opened his eyes and found the meditation hall gone. In its place stretched an endless plain of black glass. Above him, stars. Below him, the same stars, inverted, cold and perfect. His breath echoed like footsteps. He could not tell if he was standing or falling. In the distance, he saw a shape, a monk, seated cross-legged, motionless. He walked toward it. The walk took years. When he reached the figure, he saw it was himself, desiccated, hollow-eyed, lips sewn shut with threads of light. The figure opened its eyes. There was nothing inside them. Then it shattered like ice struck by a hammer. He gasped and was back in the hall, forehead pressed to the tatami, nails biting his palms. His mouth tasted of blood. He realized he had bitten his tongue nearly through. He told no one. He feared they would stop him. Isolation. He began avoiding the others. He sat at the edge of the group, eyes unfocused, movements slow as roots growing. When assigned chores, he worked silently and alone. He stopped responding to his name unless it was shouted. His body seemed to shrink, even as his gaze grew cavernous, like looking into the mouth of a tunnel. At night, he wandered the corridors until dawn, feet whispering over the boards. He avoided mirrors. Once he caught sight of his reflection and it did not move with him. His thoughts grew circular, spiraling like incense smoke. What is seeing the seer? Who is thinking the thought? If there is no self, who wants enlightenment? If no one wants, what is this fire inside me? He pressed his nails into his thighs until crescents of blood bloomed, to anchor himself in sensation. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Ruboku's warning. The master summoned him. They sat in the stone garden under a sky the color of pewter. Ruboku poured tea. Sōen's hands trembled as he took the cup, though he kept his face still. "Your eyes look like caves," Ruboku said quietly. "Are there still lanterns inside?" Sōen said nothing. "Emptiness is not death," the master said, "but it can wear death's mask. Be careful which one you bow to." Sōen bowed until his forehead pressed the gravel. The cold bit his skin. "I understand," he whispered. "You do not," said Ruboku, and walked away, leaving him kneeling among the raked waves. Slipping, the world became porous. Voices bled through the walls, chanting that no one else heard. Sutras whispered backwards in the rafters. Once he saw a monk approach him in the garden, smiling, only to vanish mid-step. He began losing time. Hours vanished like stones dropped into water. He would wake standing in the bell tower or kneeling in the cemetery. His hands were often dirty, and he did not know from what. He dreamed of fire, of black birds swarming from his mouth. He stopped feeling hunger. He stopped feeling cold. He stopped feeling like someone who could stop. The thought at the edge. One sleepless dawn he stood at the cliff behind the temple, where the mountains dropped away like folded silk. The wind knifed through his robes. Far below, clouds seethed like pale oceans. He thought, if there is no self, then what falls if this body falls? The idea came, clean, without emotion, just a shape of logic. He stepped forward until his toes hung over empty air. He felt the pull of gravity, soft as an embrace. Then he stepped back, not out of fear, out of a curiosity. He wanted to see what lay beyond falling. That night, sitting in the dark zendo, he felt the last thin thread of identity stretch. He sensed that if he pushed a little further, if he let go just once, the thread would snap and he would pass through. No self, no body, no world. The thought terrified him. The thought thrilled him. He closed his eyes. and something in him whispered, almost. The thread had thinned to nothing. He could feel it every time he sat, the slight trembling pull between Sōen and the vast, unmarked silence pressing at the edges. It was like standing on a bridge of spider silk over an ocean made of sky, and he was no longer sure which side of the bridge he wanted to reach. The dissolving. In the first days of the new winter, he stopped hearing his own name as something that belonged to him. When someone said Sōen, he would look up only after a delay, like an actor missing his cue. The syllables rang hollow, like calling through a tunnel. Sometimes when Ruboku barked it during Dokusan, he felt as if the words struck no target at all, just passed through empty air where someone used to be. Sitting, he no longer felt the shape of his body, arms, knees, breath, all blurred to a cool nothing. At first this alarmed him, then exhilarated him. He thought, this is it. This is what lies beyond the body, beyond the cage of self. The world around him faded, like a dream before waking. He began to wonder if he was still waking at all. Often he would blink and find hours had passed. Sometimes he would not blink and time would still vanish, sliding off the world like melting lacquer. He forgot the order of the day, the bells, the chores, even the meals. He existed only as a listening, a taut point of attention floating in space. The others called his name more often now to see if he would respond. Usually he didn't. Mr. Ghost movements. He continued his tasks, but they no longer felt attached to intention. His hands chopped vegetables, carried buckets, swept gravel, but it was as though they belonged to someone else, and he merely witnessed their motion. Once he looked down and saw blood dripping from his knuckles, where he had smashed them between two wood buckets. He watched it bead and fall without recognition. The other monks whispered, "He moves like a ghost." They were not wrong. He had stopped sleeping almost entirely. Nights passed in black silence while he sat in the unlit zendo, body folded like an origami shape, mind spread across the ceiling. When drowsiness finally dragged him down, he slipped not into dreams, but into blankness. No images, no thoughts, just a white wind rushing through hollow rooms. Waking felt like returning from nowhere. The first break. One night, as snow fell soundless on the cedar roofs, he sat in the zendo until all boundaries dissolved. There was no cushion, no floor, no breath. The world opened like a door, onto nothing. And in that nothing, a truth flared. There had never been anyone here to begin with. It was not a thought, it was not even an experience. It was a total erasure, swift and absolute, the sense that Sōen had been a dream by no one. And yet, something remained. A vastness, luminous and cold, like moonlight over black water. He felt himself dissolve into it, weightless, infinite. No hunger, no fear, no effort, no self. Just silence. Perfect, crystalline, merciless silence. When he opened his eyes, hours had passed. His legs were numb stone, his robe was soaked through with sweat. The candle had burned out, and he was smiling. Wide, brittle, radiant, the delirium of arrival. The next days unfolded in a kind of holy fever. He walked through the monastery in a haze of stillness. Every sound struck sharp and pure, the snap of chopsticks, the scrape of sandals on stone. Light seemed more solid, as though it had weight. The world appeared unbearably clear, each leaf etched in impossible detail. The other monks flinched from his gaze. He hardly noticed them. He believed he had passed through the emptiness gate. He believed he was awake, and in a sense he was. But it was a lopsided awakening, a sky with no ground beneath it. Fractured compassion. Ryuboku summoned him for Dokusan. Sōen bowed so deeply his forehead smacked the floorboards. The master studied him a long moment, then said, "Your eyes are full of stars, where is your body?" Sōen said, very softly, "There is no body." Ryuboku's jaw tightened. "Do you eat?" When hunger moves, rice appears. Sōen murmured. When rice moves, hunger is gone. The master slammed his stick down, the crack like thunder. Answer as a man, not as mist. Sōen just smiled. Ruruboku stared, then sighed. You have climbed a pole, he said. Now you must step off. Sōen left the room floating, convinced the words were praise. The absence grows. Each day he retreated further from the human world. He no longer felt warmth when he saw kindness, no ripple when someone smiled or wept. The emotions of others glanced off him like rain on oiled paper. A novice spilled tea on his robe. Sōen simply looked at the boy until the boy fled, trembling. He did not mean to frighten him. He did not mean anything at all. At meals, he sat still as wood, gaze fixed on nothing. The others whispered he did not blink. At night, he wandered the cemetery, reading the names on stone markers until the characters unraveled into meaningless shapes, then rebuilt themselves. He pressed his forehead to the cold slabs and thought, there is no one here. There never was. The cracks underneath. But beneath the stillness, hairline fractures began to spread. Sometimes, when he tried to rise from meditation, his body would not move, as though the message could not cross the void. Sometimes his breath stopped and did not restart until his chest spasmed. And sometimes the old world came roaring back, all at once, grief, terror, longing, crashing over him like a wave through a cracked dam. He would clutch the tatami and shake silently until it passed, leaving him empty again. He told no one. He believed this was the price of awakening, that to reach the summit, one must be scoured clean of everything, even the will to live. A warning ignored. Ryūboku caught him outside the zendo one morning, pale and swaying. You are disappearing, the master said. Be careful, the void is bottomless. Sōen bowed. Then I will fall until nothing remains to fall. Nothing does, Ryūboku said, and still you will fall. But Sōen only smiled, eyes shining with something fever-bright. To him it sounded like confirmation. The door closes behind. That night, as the others slept, he returned to the zendo and sat alone in the blackness. Hours passed. The bell did not ring. The sun did not rise. Or perhaps it did, and he no longer noticed. There was no breath. There was no Sōen. There was only the endless glittering cold. And in that cold, a thought rose like a distant bell. I am not the one who sought enlightenment. I am what was waiting. The thought rang once, then shattered into silence. There was no Sōen anymore, or rather Sōen remained only as an echo, a pale silhouette dissolving against a vast and wordless sky. He walked, bowed, ate, swept, but it felt like watching a puppet perform from across an infinite distance. The motions were perfect, the rituals exact, yet they belonged to no one. Inside him, there was only silence, enormous and glittering, like an empty cathedral made of ice. And that silence had begun to speak. The vanishing point. He stopped responding to his name entirely. When others called Sōen, he kept walking, head tilted as if listening to something deeper. He often did not notice when people spoke to him. He no longer remembered the conversations afterward. He lost all sense of days. Seasons blurred, snow fell, melted, came again. Time flattened into a single endless moment, stretching without horizon. He did not feel hunger anymore. He ate only when the body moved toward food on its own, like an animal following instinct. He did not taste. He did not sleep. The body lay down sometimes, but he was never inside it when it did. Even pain was fading. Once, during firewood duty, a splinter buried deep into his heel. He walked the rest of the path, leaving a red trail, and felt nothing but a faint vibration, like distant thunder. He began to think, perhaps I am not in the body at all. Perhaps the body is inside me, dissolving boundaries. The world no longer had edges. Objects melted into each other. The broom into the floor, the clouds into the mountains, the monks into the air they breathed. During meditation, he would watch the walls shimmer and slide apart, like screens in a dream. Sometimes the entire hall collapsed into a single blinding presence, not bright, not dark, just vast. The presence had no name, no shape, and yet it knew him intimately, because it was him, or he was it, or there was never any difference. At first this filled him with awe, then with terror, then with nothing at all. The whisper in the silence. Inside that endlessness, something new stirred. It was not a voice, not exactly, more like a current beneath thought, moving with him, through him, as though the silence itself had begun to breathe. When he walked, it walked. When he bowed, it bowed. When he looked into the mirror, it looked back, not from the reflection, but from behind his eyes. It told him nothing directly. Yet he began to feel as if he understood everything, every bell strike, every falling leaf, every breath of wind stroking the moss. All of it seemed to happen through him, like ripples spreading from a center he could no longer find. And slowly a thought formed. If I am no one, I can be anything. The monks began to fear. The others avoided him now. They whispered that his gaze made their teeth ache. They whispered that he never blinked. They whispered that he left no footprints in the snow, though this was not true, only that the snow seemed to erase his prints quickly, as if embarrassed to hold them. When he entered the dining hall, voices fell silent. He sat unmoving while they ate, eyes half-lidded, skin paper white. Once, a novice dropped his bowl, and the crash rang like a temple bell. Sōen did not flinch. He simply turned his head slowly, very slowly, and looked at the boy, until the boy wept. Ruboku summoned him only rarely now, and their meetings were brief, taut as bowstrings. "You are standing on a cliff," the master said once. "There is no cliff," Sōen answered calmly. Ruboku's mouth tightened. "That is what cliffs say before they fall." The birth of the idea. One night, while sitting alone in the zendo, he felt the world flow out from him like water from a broken jar. The walls, the air, the stars, they were not around him, they were within him, blooming outward from an emptiness so total it felt full. And in that fullness, an idea rose like a sun. Perhaps I am not merely part of the world. Perhaps the world is part of me. It was not pride. It was not even joy. It was simply obvious. He felt no distance between himself and the Buddha statue in front of him. He felt no difference between himself and the mountain outside. When he blinked, he saw galaxies collapsing and reforming in the space behind his eyes. The thought came clean as glass. There is no Buddha to become. There is only what I already am. The dismantling of reality. After that, the world thinned like old paper. Sounds arrived stripped of meaning, pure tones hanging in space. Words became strange shapes made of air. Sometimes he would watch someone speak and feel he had never seen language before, only the flapping of lips. He stopped recognizing faces. He saw only masks. Even his own hands became alien. He turned them over in the candlelight, wondering whose they were, how they had attached themselves to him. He watched them flex, curl, reach, and knew they were following the command of something, but not him. The name Sōen was a joke now, a noise that pointed at no one. The moment of becoming. The final break came at dawn. He was sitting in the garden. Frost lay on the stones like a thin breath. A single crow cried somewhere beyond the trees. The sound cracked the world open, and through the crack everything poured out. The trees, the frost, the cry of the crow, the sky, his body, the breath rising from his chest, all of it unfolded from one centerless radiance. It was endless. It was indivisible. It was him. He could not find the edges of himself. He could not find where the world ended and he began. There was only one thing, and it was everything. And for the first time he thought, perhaps this is what gods feel. A smile. That evening, during service, the monks saw him smile. It was a small, eerie smile, serene and distant, as if it had been carved into him by something older than hands. He did not speak, he did not blink. He just smiled as they chanted, lips curved like a crescent moon over black water. Some said they felt a heat radiate from him. Others said they felt nothing at all, as if their hearts had stopped when they looked at him. Ryuboku watched in silence, his fingers white on his staff. The decision. That night, Sōen sat in the zendo long after the others had gone. He thought of the years of hunger, the torn joints, the hours when he had dissolved into wind. He thought of how Sōen had been scraped away grain by grain until nothing was left. And here he was, nothing in everything, hollow and full. The silence inside him was so vast it seemed to bend the air around it. And then, with terrifying calm, a new thought entered, like a blade sliding into water. I am no longer seeking enlightenment. I am enlightenment. He did not speak the words. He did not need to. The silence spoke them for him. He no longer walked through the monastery. He moved through it as if it were inside him, corridors unfolding like veins from his center, walls breathing with his breath, bells striking from within his skull. The others said nothing, but they watched him as one might watch a candle guttering in a dark shrine, uncertain whether it would go out or explode. And Sōen began to watch them too, but no longer as people, as patterns, as passing weather. As flickers in a dream, he alone was awake inside. The first signs. He stopped bowing. At first it was subtle. In the meditation hall, when the others prostrated before the Buddha statue, Sōen only inclined his head slightly, eyes half-lidded. Soon he stopped inclining it at all. He would walk past the golden figure as if it were furniture, as if the lotus seat and the painted eyes were decorations placed in his chamber. The novices whispered in the dormitory at night, "Hasn't Bo? How? Doesn't need to. Maybe he's beyond that." Some of them sounded afraid, some sounded hopeful. The aura, a strange stillness began to surround him. When he entered a room, voices faltered. Even the wind through the paper screen seemed to pause. He spoke rarely, single syllables, sometimes nothing for days. And yet the others found themselves adjusting to his silence as though it were gravity. A novice who sat near him during zazen reported afterward that he could hear nothing, not birds, not the wind, only a deep ringing, like the inside of a bell. And then he began to weep without knowing why. Another monk swore that while bowing beside Sōen, he saw a halo of pale light around his shoulders, wavering like heat over stone. Ryuboku said nothing of these rumors, but his gaze had grown tight as a drawn bowstring, the splinter in the order. During a meal one morning, a novice spilt rice across the floor. The hall froze, expecting rebuke. Sōen reached down, gathered a few grains, and placed them slowly on his tongue. "The rice returns to itself," he said. Then he rose and walked out. The hall remained silent long after the sound of his steps had faded. Later that day, 2 younger monks began following him quietly at a distance, mirroring his chores, timing their bows to his. They began to skip Ryuboku's lectures to sit near Sōen in the garden, eyes wide and rapt. Others frowned, muttered of arrogance. But some began to imitate him too, speaking less, eating less, letting their eyes go distant as if waiting for a hidden bell. Discipline began to fray. Hierarchy blurred. The first confrontation. Ryuboku summoned him to the abbot's chamber, a place heavy with incense and centuries of silence. The master studied him for a long while, the lines of his face etched deep by years of holding the mountain steady. "You are becoming dangerous," Ryuboku said at last. Sōen tilted his head, almost amused. "To whom?" "To everyone." Sōen's voice was soft, almost gentle. "They follow because they see what they could be." "They follow because you are burning," the master snapped, "and fire blinds." Sōen smiled faintly. "Then they should open their eyes." Something flinched behind Ryuboku's gaze. anger or grief or both. "You mistake emptiness for a throne," he said. "There is no throne," Sōen murmured. "There is only the center. I simply stopped pretending I was outside it." Ruboku's knuckles whitened on his staff. "Leave," he said, "before you poison them." Sōen bowed with exquisite slowness, the gesture curved and cold as moonlight, and left. The cult of silence. The younger monks began to trail him openly now. They sat outside his cell through the night waiting for him to emerge. They copied his eating habits, his muteness, his long, blank gazes at the floor. When he walked through the garden, they parted like reeds around him, heads lowered. They called him Shinkai, the deep sea. They whispered that he had gone beyond Buddha, that he had stepped past death and returned carrying nothing, which was the same as carrying everything. He never acknowledged them. He did not need to. Their worship slid off him like rain off polished stone, or perhaps like rain returning to the sea. The crumbling of distance. The world itself seemed to lean toward him now. Birds landed near him without fear. Candles burned without flicker when he passed. Snow melted on his shoulders but left the ground around him untouched. He felt no wonder, only inevitability. During meditation, he felt the thoughts of others rustling faintly at the edges of his mind, like moths fluttering against glass. He would think of fire and someone across the hall would shiver. He would think of silence and the bell would misstrike, soundless. It was as if the fabric of things had loosened and he could tug it with a glance. The second confrontation. Ruboku confronted him again, this time in the open garden where all could see. "You are unraveling the order," the master said, voice low but shaking. "This order was a cage," Sōen replied. Ruboku struck the ground with his staff. "You are not a god." "I am not anything," said Sōen calmly. "And so I am everything." The words rang like a cracked bell. Several novices gasped. One fell to his knees. Ruboku's eyes burned. "Pride is the last veil," he said. "Veils are for those who fear light," said Sōen. They stood like statues until Ruboku turned and walked away, shoulders bowed, as if carrying a mountain on his back. The separation. From then on, Sōen stopped sleeping in the dormitory. He built a small lean-to in the forest above the temple and lived there in silence, appearing only for zazen and meals. At night, the younger monks crept into the forest to sit outside his hut. They said they could feel waves of stillness rolling from it, like moonlight made solid. The older monks began petitioning the abbot to exile him. The abbot said only, "It is too late. He is already gone." The thought that changed him. He died as he had lived, without ceremony, without sound, as if the world had only dreamed him and was now quietly forgetting the dream. The death. It was late spring. Rain slid down the paper screens in thin gray threads. The young novice, assigned to watch him, entered at dawn and found him seated upright on his mat, spine straight, hands folded in his lap. His hair hung in long silver ropes over his shoulders. His eyes were closed. At first the novice thought he was meditating. He whispered his name, Sōen. No response, no breath, no pulse, just the faint smell of rain and old incense. They touched his body, and it folded inward, weightless as an empty robe. So ended the monk who had tried to become God. The funeral without a voice. The monastery held no formal funeral. Ruboku refused to allow chanting. He went past sound, he said. So they carried his body to the forest at dusk and placed it on a pyre of cedar branches. The sky was the color of wet stone. The first fireflies of summer trembled in the underbrush. They lit the pyre. The flames rose silently, crackling like dry paper, and the monks stood in a circle without speaking. Some wept. Some simply stared, hollow-eyed, as the fire devoured the thin frame they had once called Sōen. The smoke curled up through the pines and vanished into the night. The aftermath. In the weeks that followed, the monastery felt different. as if the air itself had changed texture. The younger monks were restless, chastened. Some abandoned their training altogether. Some doubled their efforts in silence, as if to seal every crack he had opened. Ryuboku spoke little. When pressed, he said only. Elf did not reach enlightenment. He broke himself against it. But the world beyond the mountain heard a different story. The legend grows. Whispers spread, down the valleys, through the market towns, across the coastal roads. A monk who erased his self and touched the void. A monk who became emptiness itself. A monk who glimpsed what lies beyond gods. Travelers came, leaving offerings on the stone where his hut had once stood. They placed pine cones, scraps of calligraphy, shards of mirrors. Some sat in silence for days, hoping for visions. They called him by a new name now, Shinkai, the deep sea. The monks tried to scrape the graffiti from the gates, to chase away the pilgrims, to close the mountain paths. But stories, once loose, have their own legs, and his walked further than any of them could follow. Ryuboku's last visit. Years later, Ryuboku, older now, walking with a cane, climbed to the site of Sōen's hut. The forest had reclaimed it. Ferns coiled through the stones. Moss spread where his mat had been. Ryuboku stood there a long time, leaning on his cane. He remembered the boy with the frost circle, the boy who had asked what remains when the breath stops. He remembered the eyes that had gone black with silence. He remembered the moment he had realized no words could reach him anymore. Finally, he said aloud to no one, "There was never a God here, only a boy who mistook the abyss for a mirror." Then he bowed once, deeply, and left. The hollow name. Centuries have thinned the monastery walls, worn its stone steps smooth with generations of feet. Ryuboku is dust. The forest has swallowed the last remnants of Sōen's hut, but still the legend lingers. Pilgrims still climb the mountain, whispering of the monk who became the void. They kneel on the cold stones, hoping the silence will speak to them too. And sometimes, when the wind claws down from the peaks at dusk, they say they hear it. A thin voice like frost cracking, murmuring through the cedars. There is nothing to find. There was never anyone searching. Thus ended Sōen, a boy who tried to become God, and became instead an echo. Endless, hollow, beautiful. Gone. One night, alone in the forest, he sat unmoving as snow dusted his shoulders. The wind keened over the ridge like a flute. Stars wheeled overhead, cold and slow. And in that vast stillness, the thought came clear, wordless, total. There are no gods. There never were, because there is no one else here. He opened his eyes. The forest opened with them. The world no longer seemed outside him at all. It seemed inside. And for the first time he felt not awed, but ownership. He stopped being human quietly. There was no thunderclap, no revelation carved in lightning. Just a slow turning inward like a flower closing in reverse. And then nothing but the cold gleam of stone, where once there had been a man. The last day of obedience. For several days he did not appear at all. The bell rang for morning zazen. No Sōen. The bell rang for chores, for meals, for evening chanting. Still no Sōen. When he finally entered the meditation hall again, the others froze. His skin was pale as bone. His eyes shone like lacquered black stones. Snowmelt clung to his hair, though his robe was dry. He moved as if through water, each step soundless, inevitable. He sat directly before the Buddha statue and faced it for an entire day without blinking. When Ryuboku approached that night, Sōen turned his head slowly, too slowly, and smiled with a thinness that made the master recoil. "You have gone beyond the path," Ryuboku said. "There is no path," said Sōen. "Only me." Then he rose and walked out of the hall, and did not return. The breaking point. That night the mountain shuddered with storm. Wind hammered the cedar roofs, icicles rattled from the eaves like teeth. Some said they heard chanting from the forest, low, inhuman, threading through the snow like smoke. Others said they heard laughter, hollow as a wind chime in a dead house. No one dared search. By dawn, Sōen's hut stood empty, the bedding neatly folded, his robe draped over a branch like shed skin. The snow outside bore no footprints. Into the mountains. He climbed into the white silence without food, without direction, without hesitation. The forest swallowed him. Days passed. As nights bled into each other, he forgot language entirely, and he drank from half-frozen streams, gnawed pine needles, sat naked under waterfalls until his lips turned blue. He wandered from cave to cave, speaking to stones, listening to their silence until it spoke back. Sometimes he did not move for days. Snow buried him to the waist. Crows perched on his shoulders, pecking at his hair, unafraid. He no longer thought of himself as Sōen. He no longer thought of himself as anything at all. Hallucination or revelation. One night, beneath a moon cracked by thin clouds, he saw figures climbing the mountainside below him. Dozens of monks, their faces glowing like paper lanterns. They carried no torches, yet burned with a soft light. They ascended in utter silence, eyes fixed on him. When they reached him, they bowed as one, and dissolved into wind. The next morning, his fingernails were black with frostbite. He did not care. The body begins to die. His body was becoming translucent. He could see his ribs moving like pale wings. His skin tore when he stretched. His hair fell out in clumps. He heard the heartbeat only occasionally now, a distant drum fading down a corridor. Once he watched his own hand for hours and could not remember how to move it. When it finally twitched, he felt a flicker of amusement, like watching a puppet guess its own strings. The voice of the void. The silence around him had become total, and then it began to speak. Not in words, in knowing. He would glance at a rock and know how long it had waited for rain. He would watch a hawk wheel above the ridge and know the shape of the wind in its hollow bones. He would close his eyes and see the mountains folding and unfolding through centuries, breathing glaciers and forests and dust, and he would feel himself moving with them, part of their pulse. The world was no longer something he was inside. It was something inside him, and then even that distinction dissolved. The vanishing of time, weeks, months, meaningless. He could not remember when he had last spoken. He could not remember his own face. The memories of the monastery shrank to tiny pale insects, flitting at the edges of an immeasurable darkness. He lived now in a single moment stretched infinitely thin. Snow fell. Snow melted. Snow fell again. He sat unmoving while moss grew over his feet. The moment of collapse. It ended, or began, in the hollow belly of a cliff. He had been sitting for 3 days without moving. His body was locked, brittle, his lips cracked to bloodless lines. The cave was silent but for the distant drip of water, slow as centuries. Then the drip stopped, and with it the world. Light, sound, thought vanished. There was only one thing, vast and blank and roaring like a furnace of ice. And I am. It was not a thought. It was not even a voice. It was an obliteration. The white void swallowed him. There was no Sōen, no cave, no mountain, no world. There was only the blazing certainty. I am the center. I am all that is. Aftermath. He did not know how long he remained like that. When sensation returned, his body lay crumpled on the stone, limbs twisted, skin cold as marble. Breath rasped from him like wind through old paper. He crawled from the cave at dusk. The mountains burned gold in the dying light. The clouds split like curtains. Somewhere far below, the monastery's bell tolled faintly, and he felt it vibrate inside his skull as though it had struck him. The anchor asserts that in each of his experiences, past, current, future, present, future. He smiled, slow and broken. He had gone beyond men, beyond monks, and gods. Or so he believed. They found him at the end of winter. Or rather, they found what remained. The search. For months, Ryaboku had sent search parties into the mountains, though none of them said it aloud. Most believed Sōen had died, fallen from a cliff, frozen in the snow, dissolved like steam into the forest. But rumors drifted back from the villages below. A wild-eyed monk glimpsed at the riverbank, crouched among crows. An emaciated figure seen pacing a ridge at dawn, robes in tatters, footprints burned into the frost. And always the same description. Silent, staring, not entirely here. At last, after a storm broke the cedar groves, they found him. The body. He was kneeling on a stone shelf halfway up the eastern gorge, naked to the waist, his skin the color of old parchment. Snow had crusted in his hair, his ribs stood out like the slats of a broken cage. He was not shivering. He was not moving. He was not blinking. His lips were split, black with dried blood. His hands lay on his knees, claws of bone. One eye was crusted shut, the other gazed past them, through them, as though they were faint shadows on glass. They called his name. Nothing. They approached slowly, as one approaches a shrine that might be cursed. When the eldest monk placed a hand on his shoulder, Sōen toppled sideways like an empty gourd. Only then did they realize he was still breathing. Barely. The return. They wrapped him in robes, carried him down the mountain on a litter of pine branches. The wind hissed through the frozen bamboo as if warning them. In the monastery infirmary, they laid him on a mat and tried to feed him rice broth. It dribbled from his lips. His eyes rolled white. At night, he muttered fragments, half-syllables, broken chants, words from no language they knew. Days passed. His body slowly revived, but his mind did not return with it. The silence inside. He no longer spoke. He sat in the corner of the infirmary like a burnt-out candle, spine bowed, gaze fixed on the wall. Flies crawled on his hands and he did not brush them away. When the monks tried to move him, he screamed, a thin, high animal sound, and clawed at the tatami until his nails tore. Sometimes, without warning, he laughed, dry, papery bursts like dead leaves rattling. Sometimes he wept soundlessly until his face was slick with tears. Sometimes he stared for hours into his water bowl, lips parted as though listening to something deep inside the silence. They began to speak of him only in whispers. They did not call him Sōen anymore. They called him Utsuru no Hoto, the Hollow One. In mind fractures. The fragments of his former self flickered occasionally, like sparks in wet ash. Once he rose in the middle of the night, walked barefoot to the zendo, and sat perfectly upright for 8 hours without blinking. His back was ramrod straight, his face serene. Some novices, watching from the doorway, whispered, "He has returned." But when the bell rang for dawn service, he toppled sideways onto the tatami and began clawing at his robe, shrieking as though on fire. It took 3 men to hold him down. He wept until he vomited, then lay silent, eyes glassy. After that they stopped hoping. Ryuboku's vigil. Ryuboku visited him every day. He would sit across from the husk of the boy he had trained, saying nothing, just watching the faint rise and fall of his ribs. One evening, he placed a bowl of rice before Sōen and said quietly, "Return is not necessary, only arrival is." Sōen turned his head very slowly. Their eyes met for a heartbeat. And in that black hollow gaze, Ryuboku saw nothing. Not serenity, not madness. His absence, vast and endless as the sky. Ryuboku bowed, tears sliding down his face, and left. His shrinking world. The others began to avoid him. They stopped looking directly into his eyes. He was moved from the infirmary to a small side room near the cemetery, where the cicadas hummed in summer and the wind moaned in winter. Sometimes he lay motionless all day, sometimes he walked in circles for hours, muttering to himself, touching the walls like an insect, feeling its way through a jar. He ate only if food was placed in his hands. He drank only if guided. Left alone, He did nothing at all. He had become a void wrapped in robes. The legend begins. And yet, paradoxically, the whispers grew. Pilgrims heard of him. They came from nearby villages, from Kyoto, from further still, hoping to glimpse the monk who had touched the void and returned. They knelt outside his cell, waiting for a word, a gesture, a blessing. He gave them nothing. Still they came. Still they whispered. Some claimed his silence cured them. Some said just seeing him erased their fear of death. Some said he was not broken but beyond, that the mind must shatter like a shell for the spirit to hatch. The monastery tried to bar them, but the legend had already taken root, quiet and unstoppable as moss. The end approaches. Years blurred. Sōen's hair grew long, gray, matted. His spine curled like a bow. He spoke only once, near the end. Ryuboku was with him, older now, stooped, hands gnarled like old roots. He sat across from Sōen as he had 1,000 times, waiting. At last, in a voice like dry leaves, Sōen whispered, "The one who sought is gone. What remains was never seeking." Then he closed his eyes. He never opened them again.